You're listening to She's Got Drive podcast, the podcast that inspires women to be a driver in their own life through the life and stories of Black women with drive. And I'm your host, Shirley McAlpine. I'm a business consultant, an executive coach, and a leadership facilitator, working with people and organizations to live their lives by design and not default. Welcome back to another episode of She's Got Drive. Welcome back. And in this episode, we have my guest, Leslie Gross, who's an extraordinary woman. And I'm sure you are going to so enjoy this episode. Absolutely. So I'm excited about bringing her to you. But before we dive into this week's interview, I want to just share with you what's up for me this week. You know, another week in quarantine. And wow, I feel like this stage in quarantine, whilst we kind of in our groove, you know, there's so many twists and turns that happen that you have to just keep adjusting to I want to say some of the crazy that's going on out there. You know, like UK is opening up without any real plan. For example, I've got my family and friends in the UK. So, or should I say England? Let me be precise. England, not UK. England is opening up without a plan. Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, I believe, are keeping the doors closed at the moment, staying home. And so that brings up like lots of questions and concerns, you know, about that. And then we're in a patchwork pandemic here in the US where some are opening up and some are like staying in, and it's kind of always been like that. And I think that one of the things that I'm beginning to see as we start to begin to have conversations for coming out of quarantine is I'm experiencing already a bit of loss of what we're going to lose when we come out of quarantine, and trying to see how we can hold on to that. You know, I'm present to that, you know, and some of you are like, what? I can't wait to go out. I don't know what you're talking about, Shirley. But for me, I have so loved and appreciated my time with Dan and the children that it's been such, when would you get that kind of opportunity to be together in that way? And so even though we got maybe a couple more weeks of that in the way that it is right now, I'm feeling, you know, already feeling the loss of that. But there's lots of losses, you know, around that I'm present to for my family, for my friends, for the broader community. And it's been a theme that's come up in a number of conversations that I've had with people this week. And so I want to just note that. So if you're experiencing loss, and it might be just, you know, you've been in here in quarantine for a while, you're missing the experience and the loss of things that you love to do that you're unable to do, and may even as we open up be unable to do. The loss of connection. You know, when you walk out on the street now, it is different around people. It isn't the same ease that there was. The loss of friendships, the loss of seeing each other, the loss of freedom maybe some people are experiencing, the loss of being able to connect with your family, the loss of the plans that you had for 2020 that aren't being fulfilled, and you can't fulfill them as you planned it. And I look back on New Year's Eve and all that excitement for 2020, and who knew what we were going to experience, you know? So the loss of various events, the loss of work for many people, the loss of income, huge losses, big impacts, and all that brings, the loss of peace of mind. You know, we can go on. And then there's those who've actually lost loved ones, and whether that's been from COVID or not. But during this time, if you've lost a loved one during this time, you still aren't able to bury your family and your friends. You're not able to come together as a community to pay your last respects. It's a very different time. And there's a loss in that loss, in that you're not able to grieve in the same way. So So much loss there. And the place to start with any losses is to acknowledge that it's there, acknowledge the feelings that's there. And it's really hard to make new plans and to create and to think about the future and how you're going to do things differently, etc., unless you acknowledge what is. And so I wanted to kind of name that, because I know that there are certain things that I feel the loss of. And whilst it's not as big as what some people are dealing with, I think when people say that, it's not as bad as X, Y, Z, it means that you invalidate the loss that you are experiencing. So it doesn't mean it's not there, it's still there. So I feel like it's important for us to be present to the loss and acknowledge it and start to, grieve whatever it is that you need to grieve for. And so before we can move forward, it's important to acknowledge what is. So my question to you is, what are the losses that you might be present to or feeling, and what are you grieving? Because you are, if you experience loss, then grief, you're experiencing grief. And so that's a question for you. Yeah, sounds like a heavy start, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like a heavy start to the show? But an important one, I think. So, okay, I wanted to share that. What's there for me. Now, should we move on to a more happier note in a way? I wanted to just let you know that last week I said to you that I was going to release a gratitude journal on Amazon as part of the She's Got Drive journals. And that journal is now out. So if you go to Amazon, you'll be able to get 30 days of gratitude journal, making every day count. So I created these and it's really designed to help you focus on and acknowledge the things in your life that you appreciate, which is perfect given, if we're in the space of loss and what we don't have, it's also important to acknowledge what we do have. And so this is within it, this journal I've designed. I've included some inspiring quotes to empower you each day, along with some beautiful photos. It's a simple way of building happiness into your life as a daily ritual and practice. So it includes you writing get into the practice of 3 things that you're grateful for, and that you set your intention for the day as well. So it's also a journal that has you think about what is it that you intend for your day. And when we set intentions, it increases our focus and it increases our ability to achieve the outcomes that we want. So that's what's the 30 days of gratitude, making every day count. And it's I've made it affordable. It's like $6.97, something like that, $6.97. It's available on amazon.co.uk, it's available on different Amazon platforms. So if you go to She's Got Drive Journals or click the link in the show notes, it will take you to the Amazon page and you can order your She's Got Drive journal. And then write a review for me as well. So buy the journal, work through it, let me know how it's going with it, and write a review. So I will have some other journals coming out. I'm just working on them right now. And so look out for those, and also working on a planner. So there's a number of things coming out on the She's Got Drive journals through Amazon. Okay, now if you're loving the show, can you rate and review the show, please? Why? Because that is how we grow the show. That is how we expand the She's Got Drive audience, and that is how more people get access to these amazing stories of these women who are really hidden figures and doing phenomenal work in the world. And we need to celebrate them, and we need to hear their stories. And so the more people who get to do that, hear that, the better. So if you'd like to go to Apple Podcasts and then rate the show and write a review of the show, and then share the show with at least one person this week. Find one person in your life to share the show. Okay, here we go. Now, talking about hidden figures, Leslie Gross. Leslie Gross is a nationally recognized strategic advisor deploying 20 plus years of expertise in public policy and systems change. During her career, she advised cabinet secretaries, C-suite executives, and advocacy campaigns during times of national crisis and organizational transition. She heads Advantage Insights Group, which is a government affairs and public policy practice. Prior to that, she was director of Equality Fund at Open Society Foundations. Leslie was the senior appointee in the Obama administration, serving as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. She managed department interactions with Congress, the White House, and other cabinet-level agencies during Hurricane Sandy, the Boston Marathon bombing, and the Senate passage of comprehensive immigration reform effort. Her work has also received national accolades and she was featured in the New York Times. And prior to that, her career began as a civil rights litigator, where she pioneered school-to-prison pipeline litigation at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. You are going to really love Leslie. I give you Leslie Gross. Leslie, thank you so much for being a guest on She's Got Drive.
I just have to say thank you. I mean, this show is a highlight for me and an inspiration. So I am so excited to be here today.
Yes. I've wanted you on the show for so long. I can't even tell you. Can you share with our listeners about who you are and what kind of work you do?
My father's namesake. I am very much his daughter. I've taken a trajectory sort of modeled on the, Shirley Chisholm's saying that service is the rent you pay for room on this earth. My career has sort of taken some twists and turns. It's always been in an effort to leave a lasting legacy. And I do that by empowering others, by dismantling unjust systems, and sort of figuring out how people can be more effective in making their lives better. Thought that I was going to be a journalist. And I was on my way to be a modern day Ida B. Wells. I was going to be a muckraker and change the world. And I come from a very practical family where you weren't allowed to be an English or philosophy major in my family. You had to make sure you had a practical skill. On the eve of my 13th birthday, I had to go out and get a job. It was not a question. So I was on my way to being a journalist, did a lot of writing. There were two things that sort of changed me. My mother shared this clipping about Elaine Jones, who was then the first woman to head the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Mm-hmm. And she was a graduate of Howard University, where I was. And then I stumbled upon this book, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, which is something that sort of completely changed my perspective on my world and my ability to problem solve and change things. So I actually started out being a civil rights attorney. Education was a big theme in my family. I come from several generations of teachers. My grandmother was in school with Lyndon Johnson's, I don't want to say I would cook or maid, or she got a master's. At that time, you got a master's in home economics. So I came from this generation of women who did the most they could with what they had, whether it was a principal. My mother actually she spent some time in law school, and she always tells me about how the professor said that they were just taking up space for men, and all they were going to do is get married and get pregnant. So why were they there? So this really sort of fueled my desire to get that degree and make the world a better place. And I saw that education was a key way to improving lives. So I ended up being a civil rights attorney in DC. I did a lot of work in the Deep South and actually across the North at a lot of school districts that were still separate and unequal. At that point, this was the early 90s, and we were looking at the various ways that were less blatant that people were getting unequal educational opportunities. And this was before the phrase schoolhouse to jailhouse was even in the lexicon. Right. And one of the things I noticed, because it was one of the things that I experienced, was that women and girls, more importantly, children of color, were disciplined at different rates. They were put in detention. They were funneled out of school.
Right.
They had low expectations and different educational opportunities. So one of the things I worked on was sort of establishing a legal doctrine that said, hey, this is just yet another way that children are being discriminated against. And more importantly, it's part of a pattern that is funneling kids from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse.
Right.
After litigating for a while, I had the great opportunities to go down and actually work with my client heroes, parents who were advocates for themselves and community organizers in the Deep South. And so I had an opportunity to actually go down south and work with a coalition of community organizers and advocates on juvenile justice and education issues in Mississippi and Georgia. While there, I realized that there was another tool in the toolkit, and that was government and policy and advocacy. Mm-hmm. There was only so much that we were going to be able to do in the courts or through organizing, and I saw the power that elected officials had in actually changing outcomes.
Right.
And creating tools for people to do better. It was my first time actually working on immigration issues when I was there. In Mississippi, there were poultry plants where you had individuals who happened to be undocumented who would complain about a workplace injury and would get fired, or they'd be intimidated, people would be extorting money. And there were no protections. As well, I realized that it was a system and a framework that was really important to understand and have the potential to change. Mm-hmm. And I ended up, at the time, there was one of many failed efforts to improve immigrant rights happening in Washington, D.C. Right. And I ended up going back to Washington, D.C. to work on Capitol Hill on civil rights and immigration and judiciary issues. It was amazing because I actually had gone to college and law school in D.C., but I had never thought about politics ever until I saw the power that it held. And more importantly, I knew I need to figure out how systems worked before I could change systems.
Right.
And it was an amazing experience. I learned so much about how change happens in politics, how important it is to get someone to pay attention to you, what a real meeting is, where things get done versus a polite meeting where people are merely smiling and nodding and then going and doing something else. And it just reinforced the compassion of others. I got pregnant with my daughter when I was on Capitol Hill. One of the custodial workers came to me with an envelope full of cash. And they said that the group of folks who worked on my floor knew I'd had a kid and they wanted to make sure that she had a good Christmas. And they gave me this envelope, and they also said how proud they were of me as a Black woman there every day, waddling through the hallways, getting it done. And was a great opportunity and a great reminder that I still had a lot of work to do. Ended up actually had someone in the hallway, again, someone who just sort of noticed me and said, hey, if you're interested in in the Senate, I know someone that you can talk to. And I'd been doing some investigation work as part of the Judiciary Committee. And I really lucked into doing some of the most fascinating work on corruption in the Iraq War for the Senate Democratic Policy Committee. Yeah, so it was a time when support for the Iraq War was waning, but people were really trying to find a nonpartisan way to sort of demonstrate the futility and some of the corruption that was going on. I had a small team, and I took the mantle from a project that had been started, and we investigated defense contracts in Iraq and Afghanistan. That made me, I learned everything about defense contracting. I met with some amazing people who are willing to risk their lives and their careers to expose waste, fraud, and abuse. Had an opportunity to work with amazing journalists, to work with veterans, to exposure to toxic chemicals, as well as faulty electrical wiring in some of the makeshift showers that they made. You had soldiers dying because they had shoddy electrical work as opposed to dying. out. Yes, because there was such a reliance on third-party sort of private sector contractors, they would just get rid of the trash and use these things called burn pits. And without sort of recognition that if you're just sort of burning these large amounts of trash, what were going to be the environmental hazards that were happening to the soldiers. Because of a lot of investigations we did, we were able to get high-profile coverage, and committees of jurisdiction were able to, increase the coverage for veterans who were exposed to these harms when they're there. There actually ended up being later on a lot of great coverage in the Washington Post and the New York Times. A lot of the exposure, there were a few books. And it was a great way to, again, understand the importance of shining a light on corruption and that motivating people to make change. Yeah. And it was also an opportunity for me to realize that at the end of the day, good people are good people. Even in a very partisan environment, people at the end of the day, all they wanted to know was that they could do a good job, be safe, and come home to their families. And this work and investigations was one way of me doing that. I actually
so that was really. It's before you go on to what came next. That's such heavy work. When I mean, like, you've been involved in, if you think from the beginning, the civil rights work, you've been involved in the Deep South, up until this work with the Iraq War and uncovering the corruption, and how that's heavy. So I'm just like, I don't know, we can keep going. So we're going to keep, how did you, and this is from, and I know that you said you wanted to be a journalist. We didn't explore what kind of journalist you wanted to be. I'm assuming it feels like it would have sat in the same realm, but I'm making an assumption. How do you manage yourself when you're when you're in the depths of some really difficult, hard spaces, because whilst you said there were people who were good people, you also discovered the people who weren't, like you really are discovering that how despicable people can be as well. So how do you deal with that as you're going through? And at this point, you've also got a little baby girl during this period as well. So I'm curious about that because, help me understand what was going on for you during that time, and then we can pick it up in terms of how moving forward.
Well, Shirley, you picked up on something there when you mentioned my daughter. Particularly at that time, I regarded every minute that I spent away from her, I had better be doing something incredibly important. Otherwise, it wasn't worth it. I have to tell you, what has sustained me is that even in my darkest moments, I've always found someone committed to good. I saw a tremendous amount of greed, or in the case of the defense, contracting or indifference. But there was always a light of humanity that you could find, and that is what motivated me. And I had such a privilege to be working alongside some of the smartest, most genuine, most humble human beings who had the same skill set and really valued integrity.
Right.
I saw people who are willing to risk their careers, risk their lives by coming forward. So the least that I could do was to, spend my time and my effort making those risks count.
Right. Thank you for that. Because it's like when I hear that kind of, so the light of humanity, the moments of humanity, the seeing of others where they are operating from integrity, as a contrast to, as you said, the depths of greed and which we're seeing in this moment, I want to say, like the kind of, I'm like, which we'll come to in a minute, but we see such beautiful moments of humanity, and then we are seeing the depths of greed at the moment that I'm like, wow. So,
It is a study in extremes right now.
It
Definitely.
really is. It really is. So then after that, what happened? Where did you go after you did that work on the Iraq war?
Well, I actually, it was, another fortunate thing, I was able to take a personal leave when I was working on the Hill and volunteer to do voter protection on the Obama campaign. So I did African-American voter protection for all of Pennsylvania, where I'm from originally. So got to meet a lot of great folks in the campaign, also connect with folks who then went on to the administration. When I originally applied to work in the Senate, there were two jobs that I applied for. One of those jobs had been to actually work on the Judiciary Committee for then Senator Biden. Mm-hmm. There was an attorney there who had interviewed me, reached out along with a former classmate of mine, because there was a position, he remembered me, and there was a position at the Department of Homeland Security for Deputy Assistant Secretary. That's how I ended up Department of Homeland Security, which I have to say, again, if you were to ask Leslie 10 years before that if she would have ended up there, that would not have been where I was. But again, it was one of the most amazing, rewarding, fulfilling experiences. People really underestimate the Department of Homeland Security because it does so many things. It's FEMA, it's disaster recovery. It has an intelligence and analysis section. It covers the Secret Service, right, immigration. It has so many different facets to it. Mm-hmm. And obviously it's a post 9/11 creation. It is an entity that has people who are there from the first day it was formed to now. Right. So you've got career professionals who came there for a certain reason, and they've got a lot to learn. At the end of the day, it's one of those organizations with a mission of, I don't care who you are, your leanings, where you're from, we are here to protect and serve and do our very best every day. Right. I had the pleasure of being there doing an amazing immigration reform work during the time when they extended something called deferred action for childhood arrivals, right, for children who came to the United States with their parents, for them to be able to live and work in the country. I was there during the Boston Marathon bombing, mm-hmm, at a time when we saw a tremendous amount of resilience, and it was an amazing show of partnership between state and local, being incredibly prepared and working alongside the federal government. And then during Hurricane Sandy, I was there when I really got to see how important it was to uplift the voices of marginalized communities, mm-hmm, in the times of disaster and crisis, right, and in determining, who gets relief, who doesn't, and how. Right. I had amazing mentors and bosses there. One of the best bosses in my life I had there. I also had the opportunity to do international work. A lot of folks actually don't think of international work when you talk about Homeland Security, but, mm-hmm, post 9/11, our borders have extended. Mm-hmm. It was a master class in being true to yourself, seeing the joy that these nominees took in getting through this process and the pride that they had. It reminded me that if you love what you're doing, it's not work. Right. It's passion. The administration, it was closing. I had done my learning curve, and also make sure that I don't leave a job without uplifting others, mm-hmm, mentoring, identifying people on my team, asking them, what job do you want next, and helping them to get there. Mm-hmm. So I was looking to figure out what is the next step I can take, right, in empowering folks. Someone I used to intern for back when I was in law school, who had gone and worked at a foundation, and he also had been in the administration, and he'd worked on national security issues, but before that he'd actually worked on civil rights issues, and he mentioned philanthropy to me. Right. And I was sort of struck by that, because all I knew of philanthropy was back when I was at a nonprofit and I did fundraising. Right. It's a very opaque industry, but I did know that it was the difference between who gets the resources they need to succeed and who doesn't. Mm-hmm. And I was very keen on making sure that the organizations that were actually effective versus the organizations that were effective at fundraising, mm-hmm, get money.
Yeah.
I was presented with a great opportunity to work on immigration and racial justice, sort of a melding of my two areas. And I had an opportunity to use my political background to empower organizations to be more effective in their advocacy. So I ended up taking a position directing something called the Equality Fund at the Open Society Foundations. And it was an opportunity to try to get more of the professional advocacy that I saw from the private sector to nonprofits.
Right.
It was also an opportunity to put a post 9/11 understanding of immigration and how those systems worked to work for advocates who really had no idea how immigration policy worked now or didn't have access to what the levers were. I actually created a working group of folks in various regions and programs. So internationally, we would come together to share best practices on empowering marginalized communities. I was able to create a fellowship that you know a bit about, was about creating the next generation of leaders in the space of combating xenophobia and racism. And I was also able just to learn about the nonprofit ecosystem of how philanthropy works with nonprofits, works with government, and ways to make that work better. In that opportunity, I realized I had a lot of experiences to share.
Right.
And a lot of advice to give, and not just to nonprofits, but to the private sector, as well as former government officials. And I ended up deciding that it was time for me to sort of test the waters on my own to provide strategic advice to whether it was people who wanted to do corporate social responsibility, nonprofits who wanted to increase their fundraising, just know how to appeal to a funder, or simply giving other people in philanthropy advice how they can be more strategic. So I headed out on my own and started a boutique consulting firm where I am now. In this moment, I never, ever thought there would be a moment so uniquely suited to my skill set as the crisis that we're dealing with now. And it has reminded me of the importance of knowing your value, trusting yourself, and mining as much as you can from every single experience you have, because it will be useful to you sometime later on.
Right. It's your experience is so rich, and we've come, as you've mentioned, this moment where we are now and what we're dealing with in the pandemic at COVID-19. If this is making any sense to you, what sense are you making?
Well, it is a master class in gaslighting and the importance of not accepting this as the new normal. And by the new normal, I don't mean the social distancing and the way that we're operating right now. New normal in the way that government has an important role to play, and it can play it. There are some who are really exercising their responsibility to show leadership and to honor that social contract between government and people, and there's some that aren't. This did not have to happen. I know that from knowing all the amazing, wonderful, competent people who work in emergency response, local government, disaster recovery, what I've seen here. I'm really fortunate to live in the New York tri-state area, where I've seen amazing leadership shown by Governor Cuomo and Governor Murphy and others. It is a moment that really highlights where you need to not just know how the system works, but when the system works to prevent bad from ever happening. The importance of always be prepared. Something they say in disaster response is that there's no such thing as an emergency. There's only a failure to prepare. And this moment is the ultimate failure to prepare. The realities that many of us have known about the inherent structural inequities in our healthcare system, or our access to goods and services, the issues that come along with population density and where different people live, how being differently abled or age impacts the way that this is affecting you. These are things that many of us knew, but this crisis has laid bare. I actually was listening to online. I was listening to an Easter sermon. You keep hearing that this disease doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate. And then people saying, well, yeah, actually it does, because it's having a disparate impact on marginalized community. This minister made an important point. He said, the disease itself does not discriminate. It's people who do.
Right.
And when you say it's people who do, then that puts the onus on us to do everything we can in our power to act responsibly in this moment.
Right.
And so in this moment, I'm struck by those who are refusing to accept that there's nothing to be done and are doing something.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you see this and also refusing not to be silent in this moment.
Right.
We've got an opportunity right now to make sure that people never again forget that, you know, as a Black woman, when I go to see a healthcare professional, I'm not going to receive the same quality of care because they either perceive that I don't feel pain the same way,
right,
or that if there's an ailment, it's because of something that I've done or wrong myself, or because I don't have the same access to opportunities. It's an opportunity to ask ourselves, how successful is the healthcare system that's reliant on employment when so many people are unemployed in this country?
Right.
It is a moment where I think we need to be chronicling every single system, process that is preventing us from thriving the way we could thrive,
mm-hmm,
and then coming together to fix it. If anything comes out of this, it is that. I think there is a tremendous role for people who work in policy and science to work together,
right,
let the science lead in this moment. Most importantly, the frontline workers, those who are usually in the shadows, those who hold the country together, the bus drivers, the nurses, right, the attention, respect, and support that they deserve as well. It is an opportunity where I think anybody who can say something should be saying something.
Right. We need to stay engaged, and we need to be staying attention. We need to be holding the leaders accountable for what they ought to be doing.
And close to home, I connect with my college roommates now on a weekly basis. And, you know, we share strategies on how we make sure our older parents and loved ones stay in the house.
Yeah.
Just that. As parents, understanding
right,
that, you know, how do we make sure that our children in this moment are feeling safe and loved, and we're modeling the courage that's needed right now. Also, this is a moment to really revel in gratitude for what you do have, and taking an inventory of what you have. Little things that I can do, I can freely give. I've been writing much more. I've been reaching out to people much more, figuring out what can I do from, you know, my living room to share advice and best practices in this moment, because I do not want to look back and think, what could I have done?
Right.
Now, it's very interesting. I'm wrestling very much so now. As a parent, there are things that I can't go out and expose myself in the street.
Right.
I'm a single mother. I have one person who's very much relying on me. And in the past, as the former civil rights lawyer or doing the corruption work, I would have wanted to been out in the streets, you know,
right,
running towards the fire. Maturity and adulthood has taught me prioritize. And I have to be a responsible adult in this moment for my child, and a responsible adult in this moment for my support circle, my friendship circle.
Yeah.
I think it has a ripple effect, and doing the most I can in this moment has just meant also me encouraging everybody else to take care of themselves and do the most they can in that moment.
Yeah. It really is so much we can and ought to be doing in our own circles. And so what are you one of the questions I'm starting to ask people is, what are you discovering about yourself in this quarantine that we're in and in this pandemic space, and what's happening? What are you discovering?
How amazing my network is. And by network, I'm not talking sort of like professional network. One of the things I think we do, and I had this great I was in this great program called Career Pathways. The Chronicle of Philanthropy did it. And it was for senior executives in philanthropy to sort of get together and do leadership development. And there was a gentleman who was speaking about responding after the Pulse shootings in Florida. And the foundation was looking for someone who could be an expert, someone who actually was bilingual and had the cultural competency to work in the LGBTQIA community. Right. The individual was like, well, my best friend growing up, he had all that, but I didn't want to recommend him because he was my best friend. And we got into a discussion of how, as professionals of color, sometimes we discount how amazing the people are. Right. That we know. Right. And whereas someone else would not ever hesitate to put forward somebody that they knew who wasn't competent. And this has made me realize whether it is wanting to, find a doctor or a nurse or, someone's working on transportation systems. I have this incredibly rich network of friends and family who, if there's something you're looking for, they're there. Mm-hmm. And not to discount it because they're your friend or it's somebody that you knew, not to underestimate the value of your network. It has been amazing in this moment also how willing people are to find someone. If they don't know it, they'll find somebody for you.
Your job is to reach out. Your job is to ask the question. Your job is to not, right? It's to, because they're out there. There's one thing where it says that you're only minimum 10 conversations away from the person that you want to speak to or you need to speak to. And sometimes, of course, we've discovered it's much less than that. You've achieved a lot and so much. If you look at the conversation around success, and particularly in this context, how would you define success right now for you?
You're successful if you are expending everything you have to do your best at what you truly believe in. Mm. You cannot wait for external validation for that success. Mm-hmm. If your success is not somehow impacting others, to me, that's not success. That's vanity. Okay. And so success truly is creating, doing, acting in a way where you are providing greater opportunity for those around yourself and those around you.
Mm. So it has to really be the impact that it has on. I think it reminds me of the early thing that you said about service in your family. Like being of service is like a core value in your family and what you grew up with, and that's kind of what's been guiding you in your career and the choices that you've been making. Well, and then Martin Luther King talked about service being an act of love.
Yes.
So I feel like that's also what you're meeting in the work as you do the work in the various spaces as people are being of service. I think that's when, in those moments when we're working in those spaces, it's like it always feels richer. And because love is present. I mean, we don't talk about that at work. It's like, because you don't talk about love at work. But, but it is, I feel like that's one of the things that gets present, as people are being driven by this purpose to serve in whatever space that they're working in. What's one of the things, so in terms of families, one of the questions I ask is what Mama used to say. What's one of the things that your mom or another female elder, it doesn't have to be your mom, but another female elder used to say to you that's really stayed with you and has guided you?
It's funny because since we're, homebound right now, what I'm about to say, I could call my 13-year-old daughter in here and she'd be able to quote my mother exactly because it has been ingrained in all of us, which is she always, whenever we would get down or feel frustrated, she'd always say, I felt sorry that I had no shoes until I saw the man who had no feet. And it's a reminder to know that it's not the burden you have, it's how you carry it, and to be grateful for what you have. Right. And being able to adapt to the situation. Right. The Black woman's superpower is resiliency. And if I can teach that to my daughter and pass it along, I can die a happy woman and I will have been successful. And that is something that was ingrained in me from my mother, my grandmother, on and on and on.
That's so powerful. And I feel sad too that resiliency has had to become our superpower. That really makes me sad too. Because I think of all the Black women I know. And it really is. But it's like, it's a suit that we wear because we have to, too.
Yeah.
And then, which is, when the kind of Black girl magic, remember the Black girl magic and all of that? There is something that is magical, absolutely, about Black women. And the magic has come out of also hardship, has come out of the adversity, has come out of the challenge, and how we respond to that too, and what it develops in us and what gets passed down from our ancestors that creates this beautiful mix. Like this, if you like, the Black woman concoction, it's so magical. There's so much to celebrate. And I also feel sad at the same time that is what we have to, I think what it is that we have to teach our daughters that for them, for their own survival and for their own ability to thrive.
That's right. And to not wait for someone on the outside to nurture and cheerlead you. You have to be your number one cheerleader.
Right.
And if you have that resiliency provides endless possibility. If you can learn how to cope and thrive, there's nothing that can keep you down.
Right. One of the questions that I always ask my guests is what's called my Oprah question, which is, if you could speak to the younger Leslie, what would be 1, 2, or 3 things that you would say to her from where you stand right now?
Do not waste your time or energy in situations or with people where you're not appreciated. I think there is a people pleaser quality a lot of times that we're taught, particularly as professional Black women. Many times we're to be seen and not heard, or we know that we have to carry ourselves in a certain way, but just because you're in one situation where you aren't valued doesn't mean there's not another situation out there that will value you, or that you can create. Also would tell myself there is something valuable to be learned in every single experience you have, in every single one. There is a lesson to be learned that you can build on and use in your next experience. That has been transformative for me. And I have taken what, some might think are the most challenging or difficult experiences and have been so thankful for them.
First thing you said about Black women in their working in different spaces, and if you're not feeling appreciated, you can find a place where you are.
Definitely.
Is so important. Underline, because there's so many, I know, there's so many Black women who are sitting in spaces and you're like, sweetheart, no, you don't have to stay there. You can go. There's a place for you. Somewhere a place for you. So I don't know, I'm starting to burst into song more often on my show at the moment. I'm not sure why. Maybe this is my new expression.
But that goes also, Shirley, to don't let anybody define you, because people will define you if you let them, and they will limit you if you let them. You have got to be true and define yourself. After a while, but after the first or second, third time, people always show you who they are.
Yep. And
if you are not getting opportunities, you should never have to be fighting to do work or for opportunities. And I've been really blessed to be in situations where I've had bosses who've been like, look, take this and run with it. Mm-hmm. I hired you because you were smart.
Right.
I wouldn't have hired you otherwise.
Right.
So let's do this.
Right. And so if someone's sitting there feeling like they're not got that experience, then it's time to review.
It is. It is out there.
It is out there. And the thing is, because it can feed so much self-doubt, you know, and then it's like you have to be fed. Your environment has to feed you, you know, as well as you give so much, particularly around work. We show up every day and we give so much. It's just like, is this environment empowering you or is it disabling you? And there's always a place where you can go, where you can be empowered, where you can be doing the work that you're there to do.
Well, I mean, that's why it's so important, though, when it comes to work, to have a support system outside of work, mm-hmm. as well as sort of that, maybe that, at least that one person, you only need that one person at work who can be your support system.
Right.
But you definitely need someone and a group of people to remind you of who you are. And my friends always, one jokingly says, I don't hang out with anybody who's not amazing. So if you weren't amazing, I wouldn't hang out with you.
I love that. And for the record, you are amazing.
As are you.
You are amazing. Thank you so much for being a guest. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done. And I think, you know, I remind, you know, sometimes I need to kind of just say that one of the intentions for She's Got Drive was to identify what I saw the hidden figures of Black women doing amazing work in their various organizations globally, but certainly my focus obviously in the US and the UK, that we do not know about but are contributing every single day. And so whilst you were at, say, Homeland Security, no one would have known that that's where you are, beavering away every single day doing such important work. And then there you are doing such important work, you know. So thank you for everything that you've done, for what you continue to do, the contribution that you make. And it's been wonderful having you on the show.
It has been wonderful being here. Thank you so much for amplifying these voices. They are my saving grace. They are my inspiration.
I hope that you've been inspired to shift gears in your own life. Whilst there was so much in this interview, and I really want to just name the beginning of Leslie's career in Mississippi doing civil rights work and just how awesome that is, and then just to her trajectory and the path that she's taken. One of the things that struck me on a personal note is how she's teaching her daughter how to be resiliency, and that my feeling about that being, because you've absolutely got to teach our daughters that without a doubt. You know, as Black women, resiliency is a core competence, and at the same time, it saddens me that it has to be a core competence, but it is. And so one to think about is like, if you're sitting there thinking, have I developed that as a core competence for me? You know, would I name resiliency as being resilient as a skill set that I have? And if the answer is no, then I encourage you to reflect and look at that, because in the situations, in the systems that we work in and live in, that it really is a core skill. So comments, would be interested to hear what you think about that too, and what you're taking away from this episode of She's Got Drive. You know, I always love to hear from you. You can contact me through Instagram at Shirley McAlpine. You can go to my website, shirleymcalpine.com/contact me, or you can go to the Facebook page, join us on She's Got Drive Facebook group, the private group, or you could go to the page. She's Got Drive is produced by Cassandra Vortolina. The music is by the awesome or female band Blonde. Don't forget to get your Amazon journals and my She's Got Drive journals on Amazon, and particularly the 30 Days of Gratitude, making every day count. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, go well and stay well.